We're back. You are watching Alive and Well. I am your hostess this afternoon, Ann Bratsburg. With me is Mr. Pat Cannon. He is the state director for the Michigan Commission for the Blind. And Pat, before the break, you were talking to me a little bit about your career and how it's had many changes, and you said all of them basically were accidental, right?
Exactly.
Okay. You had said you were a radio DJ and in sales for the radio station for about 13 years. At that point, did you have vision?
I had diminishing vision.
Okay.
As I mentioned, I was born with lousy vision that kept getting progressively worse. And retinitis pigmentosa, as I said, is characterized by tunnel vision and night blindness. As my vision diminished, what I could read, and I could read print material fairly well if we had some magnification and so forth. Most importantly, though, I needed significant contrast between the print and the page. And I needed a lot of illumination.
A lot of light.
So some bright lights were helpful. So, for example, if I would be reading commercial copy or news copy, the print had to be dark on the page, and I found there was some benefit to using colored paper, with a yellow background. So that was helpful to me. It worked for my particular vision characteristic at the time.
What took you out of the radio career?
An opportunity to come to work in Lansing in politics.
How did that happen? Tell me about that.
Well, I was a political junkie almost forever. I remember my first presidential campaign that I became cognizant of was 1952. That was the election between Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, and my dad was pretty involved in politics at the time. So I got interested in politics at a young age, and that continued through my teen years, and some of my fondest memories in school were learning more about government and politics. And when I was in the Detroit area, I did a daily telephone talk show long before the days of Rush Limbaugh making him popular. And my show was a sort of mostly an open mic show or open line. It was called Sound Off.
Oh, wow.
And I would occasionally have guests on the show. And I did a regular feature where I would have members of our state legislature or our members from Congress as guests on the show on a regular basis. And as a result of those interactions with our state legislators, whether it's senators or representatives and congresspeople, one of the senators said, "You really should consider coming to work for us in Lansing." So to make a long story short, in the late 70s, I applied for a job and I began working on the central staff at the Michigan Senate in 1977. And I worked there for 10 years, and my job was in the communications section. And my job was to do taped interviews with senators on a regular basis. I would attend the Senate sessions in the Senate chambers and sort of covered the Senate action of the day as someone in the Capitol Press Corps would. I would come back to the office, and after doing interviews with senators off the floor, we would package stories for the day, and including what we then called actualities, or excerpts from the interviews with senators, and that went on something called the Senate Hotline.
Oh, cool.
And additionally, we would do full interviews with senators, and we would package those and ship them off to radio stations in their district. So that's how I started working in the Senate. And I also got involved with some research and analysis of various types of legislation, particularly legislation dealing with disability, because by that time my vision was continuing to diminish, and it was in the early 80s that I first went to the Commission for the Blind as a client, and that's also when I got my first white cane and then my first guide dog.
Did you face, and this is a question that I asked Lehman as well, did you face over the course of your vision loss much discrimination or not much? I personally haven't faced a lot, and I like to ask people because I'm curious, how was it, especially back in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, and did you have any trouble doing your job in the political arena there as in the communications department? Once you significantly lost vision, were they still supportive, or did you face any kind of discrimination?
It varied. First, working in the Senate and in state government, I found that state government is very supportive and understands reasonable accommodation and so forth.
Okay.
In the private sector, I had less cooperation. For example, at the radio station in the Detroit area, we did occasionally what they called remote broadcasts, where instead of working out of the studio at the radio station building, we would set up a table and a little broadcast studio inside a shopping mall or in a little mobile studio outside in front of a bank for a grand opening, something like that. And it became a question of how I was going to get from the radio station studios to the remote location. And sometimes the distance would be considerable. It might be, 5 miles away, 10, 15 miles away. And I would often take taxis to get from the radio station to the remote location. And the other air staff, when they would go to the remote broadcast, they would use their car, and the radio station would pay them mileage. And so I sought getting my taxi fares paid for by the radio station, and they were unwilling to do that. They said getting from point A to point B was my responsibility. And that was before there was an Americans with Disabilities Act, and that was before there was any other state law,
or any kind of lobbying,
like the Michigan Handicapper Civil Rights Act, that spoke to reasonable accommodation. Section 504 of the Rehab Act was already in place by then, but that only affected facilities that were recipients of federal funds.
Oh, wow. So how did you transition from politics to where you are now?
That was sort of an accident as well. After working in the Senate for 10 years in the central staff, as I mentioned, one of the things I did was work in legislative analysis. And I was familiar with the creation of the Michigan Commission for the Blind because the legislation that created the commission was passed by the legislature in 1978. So I became interested more and more into that whole arena of public vocational rehabilitation programs. And I also became more involved with issues of blindness as I began to identify myself as a blind person. And that didn't really happen for me until probably 1980, when I came to the commission as a client. That was, I believe, in the late summer of 1980. So as I became a client of the commission, I became more interested in what the commission was all about. And I also got to hang with other blind people, and spending time with other successful blind people was probably one of the most important things that I was able to do for myself that helped me in my career and my life. And I was very fortunate to be in touch with many good people along the way. And it was through those involvements that I ultimately decided that I wanted to find a way to spend the rest of my life in advocating for individuals who are blind. And that came to an opportunity for me to go to work for the Michigan Commission on Handicapper Concerns. And that was in the late 80s. And I became the director of the Michigan Commission on Handicapper Concerns. That's how we talked in those days, handicapper. And that is now called the Michigan Commission on Disability Concerns. And after working there for 10 years, I had the opportunity to come to work for the Michigan Commission for the Blind as the state director, and that was 13 years ago. I'm just beginning my 14th year as director of the Commission for the Blind.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, what a career! I wish I could have those accidents happen. Those are some pretty cool accidents. Question: well, first of all, you are married, right?
I am.
How in this career did you find that time? How did you meet your wife?
I met her at the UP State Fair in Escanaba in 1983. I was with some other blind folks, and we were conducting an exhibit at the UP State Fair, and the exhibit was about blindness, services for the blind, and technology for the blind. And she was new to sight loss then and came to the exhibit, and she liked what we were exhibiting and talking about services for the blind and issues of blind people, and that's how we got to know each other.
Wow, that's great. Now, do you have any children?
We have 5 kids and 7 grandkids.
Wow. Now, question, do any of your children have RP?
No.
None. So it skipped the generation.
Seemingly, yes.
Excellent. And does your wife also have, you had said she was new to vision loss, does she have RP as well? Or
Nope, she has something else, another kind of retinal condition. I've heard it called Stargard's and different things.
I know about that. They actually thought I had that at one point, but I didn't fit the criteria, or the the symptoms weren't quite right. So basically, you are married. You are now you've been the director here for how long?
13 years.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. What are your perceptions about? This is something that I asked Lehman. What do you feel about different organizations? I know there are two, the Federation and the Council. And if you're uncomfortable about talking about any affiliation you might have, that's fine. We won't talk about it. But I was just asking him: are you a member of either of those? Do you stay out of that type of arena, or?
I decided many years ago, when I started working with the Commission on Disability Concerns, or then called the Commission on Handicapper Concerns, that I could be most effective in my advocacy efforts if I had good working relationships with not only those two blind consumer organizations, but all kinds of organizations of and for people with disabilities. While I was a member of one of those organizations for a couple of years in the early 80s, I've not been a member of either since then, but rather have taken, I think, some pride in having good, effective working relationships with a variety of disability organizations, including the Michigan Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired and the National Federation of the Blind.
That's fantastic. And for anyone who is newly blinded, and can you give some advice, or even for the young ones out there who maybe have grown up this way and they're embarking on a career, or they're trying to make some decisions about that? Can you give any advice to kids and even to parents?
Well, so first of all, if you understand what blindness is and what it is not, I think that's imperative.
Okay.
And when you can put your vision loss into perspective and accept that your sight loss is only part of who you are, not let blindness define who you are, but simply accept it as one of your many characteristics. For example, Ann, I'm right-handed, not left-handed. I have brown eyes, not blue eyes. I still have quite a bit of dark hair, and I have a salt and pepper beard that doesn't have much pepper left in it. Those are all characteristics of mine. My blindness is just one of my many characteristics. And the way that I have put my blindness in perspective is I believe I've been fortunate to have been the recipient of many gifts in my young life, and 20/20 vision wasn't on my list, but a lot of other good things have been. And I think as you're able to accept blindness as just being part of you, and once you can receive the training that you need to acquire the skills of blindness and begin to realize that as a blind person you can still do just about anything you want to do. You just have to learn how to do them differently. And once you have accomplished that, you can put blindness solely in a category of just part of who you are and accept that it's okay to be blind. And that's the strongest message I would want to convey, is it's okay to be blind. And for those new to sight loss, we urge them to contact the Michigan Commission for the Blind so we can help with some conversation about what blindness is and help them get on the road to acquiring those skills of blindness we talked about, and give us a chance to help restore hope for those individuals and put their blindness into perspective, and they can get on with their life and do just about anything they want to do.
That's how well said. That's wonderful. A question that I did want to ask was, it appears to me your family was quite supportive of you through this. Am I correct?
Without question.
And raising 5 children, and you have a wife who also has sight loss, and obviously you guys didn't drive. How did that go? How did that go with raising the kids and not being able to drive? How did you work around that?
I would say probably not being a driving parent was one of our biggest challenges. So we found other ways, whether we count on other family members or neighbors or other parents to help shuttle kids back and forth. So neither one of us ever considered ourselves a soccer mom or soccer dad. And there was a time, and when I felt pretty bad because I couldn't do some of the things for and with my kids that other parents did. But that didn't last long, because I quickly realized that, like I said, I have a lot of skills and abilities, and while driving wasn't on my list, that a lot of other abilities were. So I think all in all, I've been a pretty good dad, and I think my wife has been a pretty good mom, and we did that with vision loss and still acquired the skills that we have to be effective parents.
That's excellent. Well, I would like to thank you, sir. This has been tremendous.
My pleasure.
I was so glad that I was able to do this, and how wonderful to get you and Lehman both on the same day. And West Michigan, once again, this is Pat Cannon. He is the State Director of the Michigan Commission for the Blind. And I am Ann Bratsburg, your hostess. You're watching Alive and Well. And once again, Pat, tell people how to get in touch with the Michigan Commission if either they themselves have sight loss or they know someone who does and could maybe utilize your services.
Well, first we have a statewide toll-free number. It's 800-292-4200, 800-292-4200. And we also have, I think, an excellent website. You can access our website at www.michigan.gov/MCB, and that's for the Michigan Commission for the Blind. Again, that's michigan.gov/MCB. You can find out all about the services that we provide. Our services are, of course, free of charge. The mission of the Commission for the Blind is to help blind people achieve employment and independence. We have a slogan that says changing lives, changing attitudes, and the way I like to express what we do most for blind people is we restore hope.
Fantastic. Couldn't put it better than that. Once again, thank you, sir, and West Michigan, we'll see you next time.